Thank you, and welcome to our new member for Langford.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I just want to begin by saying how truly an honour it is to be standing in the House here today as the MLA for Langford Juan-de-Fuca. And with your indulgence, I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about that feeling and the importance of being able to represent one's community. As I'm catching my breath running up the stairs for the basement, so apologies for that. But I want to begin by acknowledging that how honoured I am to be here on the territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Lekwungen-speaking peoples known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. And it's so important for me to be able to recognize the nations that I have the honour of working with, the Sianu First Nations, that I have the honour of working with closely, with my dear colleague, the MLA for Esquimalt, Machosen, the Sauk Nation, the Suk people, and the Pacheedaht Nation to the west, Nechalneth, and thank them for sharing these beautiful lands with me. And as I think of my relationship with the Indigenous nations in my community, the word trust comes to mind. And I share that with my new colleague, the MLA for Vancouver Mount Pleasant. When I first met Chief Russ Chips of the Sianu First Nations as chair of the Sixth School District Board of Education, he told me, and he was pretty straight up, the trust was broken. Trust was broken between education, our school districts, our ministries, and our governments of all stripes and Indigenous peoples. And it was so important for me, before I could even build a relationship with Chief Chips or with Chief Planis or Chief Jones from the Pacheedaht, was building that trust. And I am so honoured to be able to stand here, and was so honoured as part of our swearing-in ceremony for the MLA for Vancouver Mount Pleasant and I to be able to be drummed into this place for the first time by representatives from our community. I know I share in the pleasure that through you, Mr. Speaker, it was just one of those moving moments that I'll never forget about. Very briefly, I also want to touch on the fact that I'm the son of immigrants who came here to Canada with nothing. And I would not be in this chair if it wasn't for my mom and my dad and my grandma, who might be watching at home right now. This is competing with Punjabi soap dramas, so she may have different priorities, but we did tell her what channel it was on. And I just want to acknowledge that for them, politics was something that you ran away from. Politics was something that you didn't necessarily engage with. There was a lot of corruption associated with politics from where they came from. But as going through the campaign experience, and certainly having an opportunity for me to come home, whether it was as a school trustee or as chair of the Board of Education and now as an MLA, the ability to bring in politics, it's about people. It's about the people we serve. And again, I just want to thank my parents and my grandmother for instilling that message in me all those years ago, whether it was on the picket lines, standing up for what we believed in, when my parents were healthcare workers, to the point where they were supporting me on the campaign. Again, it's all about the people we represent. And I also would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the person's whose seat I have now the opportunity to occupy. I understand he was in this seat for a short period of time in his last day in the legislature, and that's the former MLA for Langford Juan-de-Fuca, and I understand I can say his name now, John Horgan, who has been a friend and mentor to me for so many years. Just a couple of things I want to highlight in regards to that. I first met John Horgan, and I think many of you on this side of the House probably already know this story. I've heard it many times from John or myself, but just to make sure that it's in the records of Hansard, I first met John Horgan when I was in grade 5. I was doing a project on the 2005 election. I was relatively engaged in politics at that time, which is hard to believe someone in grade 5 at 10 years old would be, but was fascinated about party politics, about the provincial election, was absolutely mesmerized by the leadership shown by Carol James, who was the leader of the BC NDP at that time. And I was a bit of a keener in elementary school. And so for me, it was always about getting that extra mark, getting that extra grade. And so I went to my teacher, Miss Alton, who is a big reason, again, why I'm standing here today, to say, what can I do to get that A+? What can I do to get the 100%? And she's like, why don't you invite the MLA who wins in your constituency to be interviewed in front of the class? You can at least send the email, you can make the engagement, make the phone call. They may say no, they're busy people, but why don't you make that effort? And so I did. And that happened to be John Horgan, who I was so honored to meet so appreciative that he took time out of his busy schedule as a relatively new MLA for Malahat Juan de Fuca, that was the name of the riding at the time, to be able to engage with me. And we've been friends ever since. He's a true mentor to me and someone I look so highly up to. And certainly at that time, I certainly looked up to him because he was very tall. And that's something I remember him coming out of his mini little SUV, a big, strong Irishman, me, a really terrified grade 5 student. So, you know, the other piece I'll touch on is, as many of you in this house know, I've been in this building for a number of years now as a staffer. And before that, I also took a number of opportunities to come here and watch question period, whether it was on the floor or up in the balconies. And it was a really special moment when John had an opportunity to introduce me in the House as a student activist. And he used to go around amongst our colleagues here, many who are still here, like the MLA for Victoria Swan Lake or others who have moved on to other things, and said that would point to me and say, this is my replacement in 2099. And I'm just unfortunate that John couldn't make it to 2099, but I know that he's enjoying retirement at home. He spends a lot of time fishing. His health is good. I know that he wanted me to share that with the people in our community and certainly the people here. Mr. Speaker, the constituency of Langford Juan de Fuca is diverse. Whether you have urban Langford, rural Highlands, semi-urban rural Souk, and then of course the Juan de Fuca electoral area. I have the honour of representing Langford, the Highlands, East Souk, Souk, Otter Point, Shirley, Jordan River, and Port Renfrew in this place, and it's truly an honour to do so. And so I just want to end my remarks in regards to that piece by saying that you know, my message to people in Langford Juan de Fuca, whether it's been out this past summer engaging with them in community markets, at community events, opening my community office, I want them to know that I won't take this opportunity for granted. It is truly an honor to be able to stand in this House, one of 87 individuals, to be able to represent the voices of our community. And I know that, as my predecessor will say, I'll do my level best each and every day to stand up for the people of Langford Juan de Fuca. I know that as I look across to people that when I was in elementary school I looked up to as adversaries in this legislative process, the MLA for Prince George Valemount, who probably doesn't know this, but we met in a hallway probably 15 years ago when I think you were the Minister of Justice, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe Education Minister. It's truly an honor to be here, and we're going to have a lot of vigorous debates. There's going to be a lot of back and forth, but I know we'll be able to do it in a respectful tone, and we'll be able to do it in a way we're representing our values and our perspectives. And that's something that I've learned along the way, whether it was from my parents or from John, was that values is what should drive politics. It should be about people, the fact that we all represent incredible communities. And that's what's really special about this place, is all of us are coming with that mindset, representing the communities of the Caribou, of Prince George, of Victoria, Esquimalt, Langford, or Surrey. That's what's really special about this place, is the ability for us to be able to come and have that vigorous debate, have that engagement, but also, you know, make sure that we're doing so in a respectful way. And so that's certainly a commitment that I'm going to have, and certainly I know that my colleagues on the other side will hold me to that as we debate back and forth. But again, it's truly an honor, and with that, I'm going to transition my comments to Bill 27. I never thought Bill 27 would be the first piece of legislation I would be speaking to in this House, but truly it is an honor to be able to do so. And when I think of Bill 27, the Money Judgment Enforcement Act, what really comes to mind is equity. And making sure that everyone, no matter, as we've talked about previously in this House, their race, their sexual orientation, gender identity, their class status, where they come from, how much money is in their pocket, everyone deserves access to equitable and fair justice. I think that's something that we all share, no matter what side of the House we come from. It's certainly a core value, I know, from our Premier, someone who I've had the honour of having conversations with as the Premier, and certainly when he was the Attorney General and Minister responsible for justice. And it's a really core value of our government, and why I'm so proud to stand here as a New Democrat MLA. And I think what's really important, as the Attorney spoke previously, as other speakers spoken, is about the concerns that we've heard in the formation of this legislation, is making sure that people feel represented in our court structures and our justice system. Certainly as a young person, as the youngest MLA in this House.
Are you sure?
Thank you. Not the youngest MLA right now. Hopefully there will be other younger people in the future. But, making sure that we have processes in place that protect people. Because I know so often those who go through the justice and court systems question the court structures and the justice system, and it's so important for us as MLAs and legislators at a provincial and federal level to make sure that we're updating, we're modernizing, and that's what I truly see in Bill 27, this legislation. And I know that it's so important that through this legislation, it truly does make it easier for people to get the money they're owed. I know that from conversations that I've had, formerly as a constituency assistant working in various offices for various MLAs, but also in the short period of time that I've had my community office open, this can be a pretty frustrating topic for so many people. And so that's why it's so important that we support courts and tribunals like the Residential Tenancy Branch and the Civil Resolutions Tribunal. And that's why I was so excited about a year ago to see the Minister of Housing and the Premier announce significant investments in the residential tenancy branch. The government announced back in 2021, December of 2021, one of the last announcements before the new year, that the fact that it was increasing the residential tenancy branch's operating budget and staffing by 40%. That means 50 new full-time individual employees to cut waiting times and double the size of the compliance and enforcement unit. All of that connects to this piece of legislation, and it was so important for me to be able to acknowledge that because in 2022, the residential tenancy branch awarded approximately 4,800 money judgments to landlords and renters, compared to approximately 4,100 in 2021. It's not easy being a tenant. It is such a challenging time to be a tenant in British Columbia, as it is all across the country. The cost of living issue is impacting so many people, and I heard that on the doorstep in Langford, Juan Fuca during the campaign, and I heard it last week when I was back out on the doorstep or at the Luxton Fall Fair, a staple event in my community. It's a tough time. New immigrants, 250,000 people have made British Columbia their home in the last 2 years. That's something that's exciting, that's something that we should be celebrating, but it also means that those individuals that make this place their home are going through a very stressful time. They're going through a challenging time. I had the opportunity to be at the University of Victoria just last week and talk to individual students about the challenges they're facing with being renters in the housing market. If they're not able to access housing on campus, they have to compete with everyone else in a market, and certainly in a market like Victoria or Vancouver or wherever it is, it can be challenging. It can be very challenging. And so what's so important is going back to the investments we've made to the residential tenancy branch, it's about creating equity and fairness for everyone involved. It's about creating equity and fairness for landlords and for tenants. I have many frustrating conversations with landlords who feel like the system is not there for them, and many of them leave the process as well. And I hope that when they see this type of legislation come forward, many of whom have received orders through the residential tenancy branch, but are not able to collect on them. And similarly, it was discussed previously by another person that I was talking to about how there are so many renters that don't get their damage deposit back, don't get their pet deposit back, and that's a lot of money. And it doesn't matter how big your rental unit is. Sometimes it can be half a month's worth of rent. And in this market, that's a lot of money. And that's something that we need to be mindful of as we work through our housing legislation, but that's something that is addressed in the Money and Judgment Enforcement Act, is making sure that we have investments in place. And as with our Homes for People strategy, as we're making more investments in affordable housing, as we saw the Premier and the Minister of Housing and the Minister for Water, Land and Resource Stewardship announce just a couple of weeks ago before UBCM, the secondary suite incentive, which I know there are a lot of people in Langford, Juan Fuca who are really interested in knowing more about, who are interested in building rental suites on their homes, as part of their own establishments. It's so important that as we make those investments in our Homes for People strategy, it ties directly back into the work that is happening in this Money Judgment Enforcement Act. Mr. Speaker, I also want to touch on the important investment that our government made, and again, it's tied to this legislation through the work that we did with the Civil Resolution Tribunal. I don't think a lot of British Columbians truly understand the Civil Resolution Tribunal and the importance that it plays in our society. And what's really important for me to be able to touch on why I feel the Civil Resolution Tribunal is so important is access to justice, making sure that our justice system provides easier and a really inclusive approach to our justice system, especially for individuals with limited resources or those that feel that our justice system has not been there for them. There's systemic racism in all aspects of our government. That's something that we're addressing through the work that the Attorney and the Parliamentary Secretary for Anti-Racism is doing. But again, it's tied back into this legislation. The efficiency and the cost effectiveness of the Resolution Tribunal, the user-friendly platform, that's something I hear often, is the fact that you have these new modern, again for young people, it's not as fun to go to the courthouse to be able to access these types of tools. It's not as an easy thing to do, and so being able to have an online platform where you're able to access these tools is so important. Again, I touched on it before, but making sure that it's inclusive and equitable, having an alternative dispute resolution, a legally binding decision, and also empowering citizens is so important, providing them with direct control over their dispute resolution process. I think that's why, for me, the Civil Resolution Tribunal is so important, and so why I'm so proud that it was this government that brought it in. And I know that for our government, one of the reasons we brought it in was reducing court backlog. Again, this was an issue prior to the pandemic, but finding ways to aims to alleviate the backlog in our provincial court system has been a struggle that many governments have had. Again, whether it's our government or the previous BC Liberal, now BC United government has had, ensuring that there's more timely access to justice by reducing the load on traditional courts, improving legal accessibility, addressing these minor disputes in a different setting is so important. And again, I just come back to the fact that these tribunals, through this legislation, will now be automatically entered into the registry database. That was not something happening before, prior to this legislation, and in fact is not happening right now because this legislation is not in force yet. But money judgments under this proposed legislation, as I have mentioned, will be enforced with a single enforcement instruction, which means less time, which means less red tape, and an ability for people to get moving with what they need to do. And again, on the residential tenancy side, what's so important when you're in a housing crisis, that means fairness for tenants and fairness for landlords and everyone involved in the housing system. Mr. Speaker, I also want to just touch on a couple of other pieces. I think it's fair to say that many people, give up on the collection of full amounts under a current status quo approach. Many people that I certainly talk to in my community and throughout the province often talk about the fact that the money judgment process we currently have can be expensive and inefficient, and that can be frustrating. And again, that puts a lot of challenges on our court systems and also puts a lot of frustration on British Columbians who then don't have the trust in the court system when you have the situation where a tenant is just trying to get their damage deposit back, or you have a landlord that's just trying to collect from a tenant. And so again, I was really interested as I was looking at the previous legislation, the Court Order Enforcement Act, which is very much what is currently in place and what the Money Judgment Enforcement Act replaces, dates back to British legislation in the 1800s. Again, we're in 2023, and it's so important that we're making the investments and making sure that through the work that we're doing as MLAs that we're modernizing this legislation. I touched on the importance of these tribunals, but I also want to spend a little bit of time talking about the charges, and I know my colleague from Richmond previously had talked about how these changes, could have been in the past unfairly punished those who owe, and that's certainly a question that many may raise: is will these changes unfairly punish those who owe? And I think it's fair to say collectively our answer is no. These changes will certainly make it easier to settle, collect outstanding debts equitably. That's the key word. Again, I've been mentioning that throughout this speech, is it's done equitably. And there's safeguards in place that ensure that people who owe money and their dependents can maintain a basic standard of living. Again, that is something that many people face during normal times or are facing now as the cost of living issue impacts so many people that it's so expensive to go to your grocery stores or to pay your rent. And again, it's so important that we protect those vulnerable people. And so why it's so important as I talk about that is we talk about the sorts of property that will be exempt from seizure. And again, my colleagues on both sides have touched on it. That includes food. It includes medical aids, 70% of wages or other income, court awards to pay future medical expenses, pets, burial plots, RDSPs, RESPs, and any equipment used as part of employment. And it's also so important to touch on the fact that it also is exempt from property exemptions, including principal residence, a one car, one bike, one computer, and one mobile phone. Again, making sure that at the end of the day, as I've touched on, I think when people go back and listen to my first speech, they're going to hear the word equitable a lot, and that's okay. I like that word. It's what brings me here today. It's so important that we take those steps. One of the other things that many people may ask is what took so long to bring this legislation in place? So certainly, there have been other provinces that have been quick to be able to bring this legislation forward. But I think it's fair to say, and my colleague across the way, the MLA for Abbotsford West, certainly touched on it in his remarks. And I was listening because, again, it's someone who sits across from a different party, but someone who I've watched debate in this House since I was in elementary school. Not to make you feel old, MLA for Abbotsford West. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan.
Through the chair, of course.
But as he touched on so eloquently, and others have as well, this legislation is quite complex and requires special rules to account for many different types of specific property. And that's why I think it's so important to acknowledge the Attorney General, for undertaking this work. Certainly the previous Attorney General, the Premier, who I know put a lot of work and effort into this as well when he was in that role, and also all the staff who have been a part of that process as well. This is not the type of stuff that's going to make the front cover of the Vancouver Sun or in my case the Times Colonist, but is going to be important and changes made to protect people and again modernize our structures. And I think it was just really important for me to be able to acknowledge that. And what also I'll just end with, Mr. Speaker, acknowledging is that it's so important that we follow the lead of other provinces. I've always had this core belief in anything I've done, whether I was a student activist or just a student at university or a school trustee or chair of my school board or now as an MLA, that there is amazing things happening in our communities. There is amazing things happening across the province of British Columbia. And sometimes there are amazing things happening in other provinces like Alberta and like Saskatchewan that have legislation like this in place. And so I know that Alberta was the first to do so with legislation that has very much the similar general structure as we have in this legislation. I know that there are different pieces, and I know that the MLA for Abbotsford West and the Attorney General and other members will have an opportunity to be able to dive into that through the Committee of Whole process. But I've always had this core belief that it's okay to take other ideas. It's important to acknowledge them, and so it's important for me to be able to acknowledge the leadership that was shown in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland and Labrador that have similar legislation. And it's so important to British Columbia that we don't turn a blind eye to that, but we acknowledge that and we make sure again that we're modernizing, that we're innovating in terms of our legislation processes. So truly is an honor. Years back, when people asked me what is going to be the first piece of legislation I had the honor of standing up in this House and talking about, some might think housing, some might think healthcare or different piecing, but for me it's going to be the Money Judgment Enforcement Act, and that's something I'm certainly going to remember for a long time. And as I say that, it's an important piece of legislation. It's legislation that, again, makes sure that there's equity in our court structures, make sure that you have a situation in which you have a tenant who, again, just wants to be able to go through the residential tenancy branch process, know that they've been able to be awarded their damage deposit back, and know that they're going to get that. Know that they're going to get that because they may need those funds to be able to put down a damage deposit on another rental unit. Or you may have a landlord who may feel that, you know what, I'm getting really frustrated by this. I'm getting really frustrated about how I feel like the system is not on my side. And when you go through, again, a similar process, whether it's the residential tenancy branch or even the civil resolutions tribunal, you may not be able to access those funds. And so you may decide, you know what, because of the frustration I'm facing, it's not worth it for me. And so I'm going to take my rental unit off. I'm going to remove the garden suite or remove the basement and just leave it empty. And when you're in a housing crisis, we can't do those sort of things. And so again, that's why it's so important that we're bringing forward legislation like this to be able to protect those and to create that equitable process. I'll just end, Mr. Speaker, by saying once again, it's such an honor for me to be able to stand here as the MLA for Langford, Wanda Fuqua. I've thought many a times standing in the hallways what it would be like to be standing at this seat. It's particularly special for me to be in the seat. You often wonder, the government house leader, and I'm sure my colleagues on the other side have interesting discussions about seat politics and where people are in the House. I didn't really think much of it. I thought maybe being a newbie, the MLA for Vancouver Mount Pleasant, and I might be on the other side, which would have been fine. It would have been lovely to have been able to engage with the folks on the other side. But what was absolutely, especially the MLA for Nelson Creston, the other young MLA in the legislature. But what was really special for me in particular was the first thing I did when I sat down in this chair was to lift up this, which I know many do, and to see the Minister of Housing's name in here, which was particularly special for me. Many of you know he was my former boss when he was the Minister of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation, and it's such an honor for another first name, I can't say that, to be able to very much follow in its lead. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you so much, and I look forward to, over the next couple of hours, hearing more discussion from both sides of the House. Hopefully, my colleagues from the opposition will engage as well in debate on Bill 27, the Money Judgment Enforcement Act. Thank you so much.